And welcome back. Well, you can see we're back on our parts truck here. We've got a relay and a bit of wiring kind of sitting on the fender here, kind of preparing things. And what this relay is a standard 4-pin relay. So on a standard 4-pin relay, you got pins 85, 86, 30, and an 87. In this particular case, we only have an 87. We don't have an 87A as well because we know this is just a 4-pin relay. What we're going to do with this relay is that we're going to wire this in to this TIPM to take the place of the internal fuel pump fuse, which is a pretty common problem on these older TIPMs. Various makes and models of Chrysler products all have this problem, whether they be Jeeps, Durangos, Ram trucks, 1500, so on and so forth. They all kind of use this same TIPM. And like I said, the earlier ones are prone to have this problem. And what can happen is what has happened on this truck as well. The relay, as you can see, there's other relays on this TIPM, but the fuel pump one, for whatever reason, is built in to the TIPM. In other words, in order to access it, you have to completely take the TIPM apart, take all the fuses apart, take the shell apart to get to the circuit board underneath to repair the fuel pump relay. And what you can see here, and this truck came from the auction like this, so the previous owner has this problem, is that there is a bypass cable, or what they typically call a TIPM fuel pump relay bypass cable, going between here, which basically puts the load of the fuel pump on one of the auxiliary, cigarette lighter adapters on the inside of the cab. So it basically just moves the fuel pump load from the relay that's built onto the PCB to an alternate relay. Now that relay will handle the load, everything will work fine, and this truck does start and run and drive okay with this bypass in there. However, this bypass has a couple of drawbacks to it, meaning anytime the key's in the ignition, whether the engine is running or not, the fuel pump is running full on. What is supposed to happen is that the PCM, or the ECU, engine controller, however you want to call it, is supposed to control the fuel pump relay. And what it does is it takes and basically turns the negative side on and off of the coil for that relay, controlling basically the on and off state. And typically what's supposed to happen is when you first put the key in the ignition, it'll run the fuel pump for about 1 to 3 seconds, and it'll shut the fuel pump off unless it sees a crank event. In other words, if it sees the starter get engaged and start to crank the motor over, it'll then kick the relay on full time. Now that's also a safety feature. So let's say you're out here working on the truck and you're just listening to the radio, or you need to do code reads, but you don't necessarily run the engine. If you put the key in the on position, again, after about 1 to 3 seconds, it'll stop running the fuel pump. The way this bypass works is as long as that key's in the ignition, and the ignition is either in the on or accessory or on position, that fuel pump is running all the time. So that's a bit of a safety issue. It's also a safety issue in the sense that if you get in an accident in this truck, one of the things the computer usually does is shut off the fuel pump relay, basically killing power to the pump. So that way, you're not in the middle of an accident and for whatever reason, it continues just to pump fuel in case you break a fuel line. But with this bypass in here, what's going to happen is, as long as this circuit, this relay, still has power and you have power to the vehicle, it's not going to care what condition the truck's in. It's going to continue just to actuate that fuel pump. So, again, it's not a dig on anyone who runs these. Obviously, you can see here the previous owner of this truck ran this, and I understand you got to do what you got to do. If it breaks and you still got to go to work or get home or whatever the case may be. But again, they do sell these as temporary fixes, and unfortunately, with a lot of temporary fixes, usually if a temporary fix lasts, then it ends up becoming a permanent fix. But what we want to do is that we're going to get in there per some wiring diagrams, part of a kit that Chrysler actually put out. And they didn't do this for the Rams, and I don't know why, but they did do this for the Durangos and some Jeeps and such. And it actually was a safety recall in the sense that they came out with a kit to basically remove or bypass or remove the need of the fuel pump relay built onto the circuit board, and it just puts it onto an external relay such as the one you see here. In that way, it allows the functionality to come back and allows the PCM to control the fuel pump as it should. Now, that kit is long since unavailable, but the directions on how to install that kit for the Jeeps and the Durangos are still out there. So what we're going to do, and again, we just took this relay off an existing third-party wiring lining harness because it was a 4-pin relay just like we needed. We're going to use the rest of the instructions, however, to pull off and cut the necessary wires on the bottom of the TIPM, basically removing the control and the power feed off the internal relay for the fuel pump and put those responsibilities onto this external relay that you see here. So we've got it wired up. Again, it's just standard 4-pin relay, so your 2 pins on either side, which is going to be your 85 and 86 pins, is your positive and negatives. It's going to drive the coil of the relay. Pin 30 is our main power feed in, and you can see here that when I can find it, we do have an inline fuse here, so we're going to put a new 20 amp fuse in here that's going to protect the relay, the circuit, and the power that this is going to feed back to the pump. So we're going to have battery positive come in on this line. This blue wire is going to splice into the fuel pump feed that would normally come off the bottom of the TIPM, that would normally come off the bottom of that internal relay. We're going to splice it in and solder and heat shrink it into this. So I'll show you all this kind of as we get into this, but what we're going to have to do is obviously remove our extra power wire that goes inside and feeds our powered and heated seats, as you know. And then we'll obviously disconnect the battery before we begin, and we'll look at getting this TIPM out of here and start tracing down the wires that we need. Sorry. And in case you're curious, at least on this Ram 1500, and make sure you have the wiring diagrams if you're going to be doing something like this, because again, unfortunately, those relay kits just aren't manufactured anymore. I really wish they were, but what we need off our TIPM is connectors C1 and C5. And off the C1 connector, we're going to take a pin A40, which is a brown wire, 22 gauge, as you can see here. That is the relay, the negative side of what is this going to control this relay. The positive side feed, we're going to get off the C5 connector, pin 4. It's a pink with a light green. And this, you notice this says fused ignition run start control output. So basically, it's going to be a fused positive 12 volts that's only going to be present on the coil of this relay when the key is in the ignition. And of course, this C5, pin E10, dark blue with an orange tracer, fuel pump control output. That is going to be the main power feed out to the fuel pump that we will tie into this blue line off our made-up relay here. So what we need to do is get some stuff disconnected, get the battery disconnected, get this power line disconnected, and then we'll work on getting this TIPM out of here, and we'll start tracking down the connectors we need. Now, I did go into all data to show you this as well. We know we need connectors C1 and C5. And the nice thing is it tells us the color of the C5 connector. In this case is going to be brown, and it is a 27 pin connector. By looking at this diagram here, yeah, it looks to be about it says it's 27 cavities, but it looks like it's a 40 pin connector. Sorry, yeah, looks like it's a 40 pin connector on C5, and it's brown. And C1 is a monstrous 50 pin connector, and it's going to be black in color. So that's going to help us track down which pin we need, as well as looking at the pinouts with all the colors and kind of descriptions. And again, this data, these plugs came out of All Data DIY for this particular year, make, and model of truck. So let's start getting some stuff disconnected, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our TIPM out. After you disconnect the battery cable, there's these 4 release clips on the corners here. You just depress them in. You may have to put a little bit of upward force on it, otherwise these clips like to fall back in and latch back into the tray. But once you get these out, there's enough slack in the cabling that you can just pull all of this up. And when we got our C1 connector, now I know this is going to be kind of hard to see, but when you look down in here, you'll see a letter A kind of like right next to this connector, which stands for, in this case, C, the first connector, C1 that we were looking for. Now, it says this connector is black. Well, there's 2 black connectors in here that are 50-pin connectors. Now, how we know the difference is, and this is also hard to see, but there are numbers on the back of here, very, very small, but we did manage to find pin 40 brown, and this is connector A, meaning connector 1. And also, if we look at our wiring diagram, you'll notice it goes from pin 40 all the way to 49. So the only thing around here after pin 40 is just the one wire we need, which is fuel pump control. And you'll notice on this connector, there is nothing around that pin before or after it, just like our wiring diagram. The next wire doesn't begin until this one, which is pink with white, which is 49 and then 50. So that's definitely the wire we need, which is this brown lone wire sitting by itself. Now this is fuel pump control. So this is coming off the PCM. This is the negative side switch. So what we want to do is we're going to come down here a little ways and give ourselves some slack. We're probably going to cut it maybe right about here or so, just to give ourselves some extra in case we ever have to revert this change. We've got some spare to deal with. And then the negative side of our coil for our relay is going to splice into here, and then we'll get everything all heat shrinked up real nice. So that's going to be the first connection that we make, and I'm going to bring it back and show you when it's done. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our other connector out, which was our C5 connector. Yeah, C5 connector. We've got our first wire tied into, which is what they call fuel pump control output. And you can see that we've just capped off and heat shrinked the connector that used to go in the TIPM, both on this one and the other one. You can see that. So that was our negative side control for our coil. This is actually the 12-volt feed output that would normally come off the internal TIPM relay to the fuel pump. We're just replacing and splicing that wire together with what will be the 12-volt output of our new relay. So that connection's been made. That's been made. We got one more connection to make on this one, which is going to be to pin 4. They want us to splice into pink with a light green. So we need to track that wire down. Now we know from looking at our diagram here that pin 10 off the connector we're working on now, which is again, you can see we're on brown connector, and the wire we just used was 10, fuel pump control output, and they want us to tap off of what is pin 4. And so if pin 10 is here, so there's 9 there, there's 10, so we know that wire is 10, and we're looking for 4. See, you can see here on the side of the diagram, it looks like 4 is kind of off here, off to the side. So you got this nice row of pins, you got 3 here, we got 4 here, so that's what we're going to be looking for. Now, if we got our orientation of our connector correct, which we do, because pin 9, the way we have it oriented is this long connector here, or this long spade connector here, a female spade connector. So 3 is here on the side according to this, and 4, and you can see that there doesn't appear to be a pin in 3, which is fine because remember we don't have a pin 3 in our diagram, but up here we do have a pin which matches up with 4. And if we look at our color code, that is going to be off to the side. Yeah, I do see a pink wire. It's probably hard for you to see, but it's right there in the corner. I'll bring you back. Now what we have to do on this one, this is going to be a little different. We're not going to do a cut and a splice. We actually have to splice into that wire. So we're actually going to cut it, and we're going to join 3 wires together and hinge shrink it, because that's going to be the positive coil, or the positive side of our coil for our new relay. So this is going to splice into that pink with a, let's see again, it was pink with a light green tracer. So I'm going to take care of this and then I'll bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. So we're just working on our pink with our green tracer. And what I ended up doing, just to give us a little extra working room, what they want you to do is to pop this green retainer off and de-pin that pin, bring it out, peel the insulation back a little bit, solder, and that way you can slide a piece of heat shrink on it. Well, I didn't want to de-pin this. I didn't want to disturb it any more than I already have. So we ended up just cutting it, as you can see here, putting a little piece of extension wire on it to make this easier to deal with. Soldered the original, so we basically soldered the original connection together, and then we brought our third line in from the top to kind of meet it, and just to kind of show you what we've done there. So all three of these wires are joined together. So we've got that spliced into the pin they want us to splice it in. We're going to heat shrink all this up. We're going to zip tie this a little bit on the inside just to give this wire some extra support so it doesn't bounce around too much, although there's not very much room in that bottom of that case for things to do that. But either way, rather be safe than sorry. So we're going to get all this buttoned up, get this TIPM installed, and bring it back in a moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our two connectors back in, our C1 connector and the other one was C5. Yeah, C1 and C5 connectors are back in our TIPM. This is the wiring that's coming off the relay. I just secured it with a couple of zip ties again because we got soldered connections in here just to give those connections some extra support so they don't rattle around. So we got one connection left to make, and that is going to be for our power. That's going to feed our relay and eventually be, transferred over to our fuel pump. But all I got to do now is get this wiring harness kind of slipped down in here. Now, what I'm going to have to do is, because this fits down inside, and you can see all the wiring for the TIPM comes in this way and up, but there's enough of a gap usually between the fuse box here and the case here. What we can do is just kind of shove this wiring in between that gap, and I'll show you when it's back down. So one moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our TIPM in place. Haven't mounted our relay yet. It's just out here for the side for us to do some testing. And I removed that bypass cable that again was basically feeding the fuel pump from this location, but driving it off a relay that fed that location. So I got that out of here. Put that fuse back in. So we got our power outlets in a truck that'll still work. I'm not going to populate that fuse there because there's kind of no point at this point, because it's going to have its own separate fuse, which again is right there, which goes into the relay. I did come through here. This is where we tapped in our power. You can see our eyelet there, just off our main battery. And yes, I will come through here and kind of police all these wiring up and kind of tidy everything up and figure out where I'm going to mount this relay. But for now, we're ready to test. So I'm going to reconnect the negative battery cable and I'll bring you back. And what we're looking for is when we put the key in the ignition, anything other than it should initially prime the fuel pump for the first 1 to 3 seconds and then shut off until we start to crank. Then we'll go to crank. It should close the relay, power our fuel pump, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So we're just looking for those cases where it shouldn't, for not to run the fuel pump when it shouldn't be running the fuel pump. So bring it right back. And welcome back. So I'm just going to key it on, and the good thing is the truck does start and run. A little bit of spoiler, we went ahead and tried it ahead of time, and so far no excess lights on the dash. Everything's working in the TIPM. There's nothing coming up and saying it doesn't have connectivity, yada yada yada. So what you're going to hear is I'm just going to key cycle it, and you'll hear the fuel pump prime, and within about that 1 to 3 second window, you're going to hear that fuel pump stop priming. It's going to be a little hard for you to hear the relay click because of all the other noise going on, but you're going to tell it's working because you're going to hear that fuel pump prime, and then it's going to stop. If you want, you can just let's just you can stick it down in the engine compartment a little bit more, just so they can hopefully it'll pick it up. It should pick it up. I can hear it from here. Okay, and hopefully you heard that. So right before I started it, we key cycled it about 3 times there, and you could hear it build pressure in the fuel rail and then stop. And that's what we're looking for, because again, we're looking for that safety feature where if some technician's working on this, which it's got to go in for a recall work, and I didn't want the technician to not know that the fuel pump, although you could hear it, but still, if they have the key in the accessory position and maybe they've got it in the accessories or on but not running because they have to program it or do updates, well, previously the fuel pump would just run constantly, and it's not supposed to be running constantly. And now if the truck is ever in an accident, then that means the computer will be able to shut the fuel pump off like it's supposed to, rather than before. Again, even though that bypass works, and I know they sell them as a temporary fix and it'll get you by, but whereas before, if that circuit still had power, that fuel pump would pump. It's not going to care the condition the truck's in. It wouldn't have cared that the computer told the fuel pump to shut down. So there you go. That is a confirmed fix. All we have to do now is finish tidying up our wiring and get our relay mounted somewhere. And I know there's been individuals on forums, when you research this, you're going to run across a couple of forum posts where individuals don't like doing the external relay, and I get it, but this is a fix to a safety fix that Chrysler put out. The proper fix, to be honest with you, would be to either take the entire TIPM apart, replace the internal relay on the circuit board. But the question is that as much as an external relay can fail, if you take this thing apart, and hopefully it doesn't break in the process, and you replace that relay, who's to say that relay won't burn out or go bad again, or have the exact same problem that it does now? The other thing is, I know a lot of, and just like all these relays being external, now if this one goes bad, we just have to pull it out, replace it with another one, carry on our way. Also, with this one being external, if you know about relays, if we have to and this goes bad, you can jump this relay out, get power to the fuel pump, and be able to get yourself home. Whereas before, it was built inside this unit, so when it went bad, that was it. You know, you didn't pass go, you didn't collect $200, yada yada yada. And if you didn't have one of those bypass cables with you, you weren't going to be able to do that. And in my opinion, this makes this a lot more serviceable than what it has been in the past. So with that being said, hopefully it helps you out, shows you a little bit of the connectors on it, and to let you know that the instructions that you're going to find for that safety recall, for that relay, even though the kits aren't available, I'll put a link in the description, but the PDF is available that tells you what connectors to put out and what colors to splice into. From what I'm finding, even though this isn't a Jeep or a Durango, it's the same TIPM. It's the same color wires. They seem to be in the same spots regardless. But again, just double check with your own wiring diagrams before you get in there and start, cutting stuff up and things of that nature. But with that being said, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. We just surpassed 1,500 subscribers, and we're still continuing to grow, which is excellent. Again, the more subscribers, the more views. The more views means the more ad revenue, and so on and so forth. Again, makes doing this stuff easier to do, to be honest with you. So we're gonna get this tidied up. If you haven't subscribed, again, please consider to do so. If you have, much thanks. We're gonna get this cleaned up, we're gonna get this relay mounted, and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.